The key thing, I suppose, to describing anything is to think who your audience is. And in a pragmatic trial, our audience is decision makers. That's who we're trying to put across our message to, so that it will help them in making decisions about clinical care. So in that case, I think the most important thing is to think, what will they need to know if they were going to try and use this intervention in the future if it proves to be successful in the trial. So it needs to be described with enough detail that they can actually do that. Now, unfortunately, the evidence, all the evidence is that in trial reports, interventions are not described very well. And in fact, we did a piece of work recently with guideline developers from the National Institute of Clinical and Health Excellence in the UK. And what that indicated was that actually description of the intervention was one of the areas that they thought was particularly badly reported. So the question is, how can you help people to report better? Now, in this kind of era of modern technology, it's obviously possible for you to report a small bit of detail in your trial report and then something much longer in much more detail on the internet for people to look at. But nevertheless, I think it is important to report as accurately as you can within a trial report. So there are two guidelines that help with that. One is the Consort statement for pragmatic trials, and the other is the tidier guidelines for reporting interventions. Now, the Consort statement for pragmatic trials highlights two particular areas which should be reported in addition to the general reports. The general details that you will put into a trial report. And they are, how flexible was the intervention? So because we're dealing with trials where we want to evaluate interventions in the real world, we allow a certain amount of flexibility in our trials. Now, sometimes there may be more flexibility than others, but obviously if you're a decision maker, you need to know how much flexibility there was in delivery, because that will help you to interpret how you might roll this out in the future. And the other important area is whether there were any extra resources used in the trial in order to enable the intervention to take place. Because again, decision makers will need to know that in case they need to procure those extra resources somehow to roll out the intervention in the future. So those are the two key factors that the Consort highlights as being extra things to report in reports of pragmatic trial interventions. The tidier guidelines just go through a series of things that you should report in any intervention. It's not particularly designed for pragmatic trials, but it's also helpful. So things like how the intervention was delivered, who by, if it involves a series of sessions, how many sessions, over what period of time, the intensity of the intervention, all sorts of things like that we should report. So I think those two guidelines are helpful, though I will come back to what I said at the beginning, is I think the most important thing is to think about who the audience is, and therefore what sort of information would they need in order to take the intervention forward in health policy, in health practice, if they wanted to.